For a close relationship that can last us through all the years of our life, no doll can take the place of aces back to back.
Still, you will admit that Mindy's cheesecake is the greatest cheesecake alive.
Marlon Brando, the godfather of 20th century cinema, was not only a great actor, but also a rebel who clashed irreconcilably with Hollywood's glamorous world. He once bluntly declared, "I don't hate Hollywood. I just despise the people who make it filthy." And indeed, throughout his career, Brando never hid his contempt. He scolded a co-star to their face for only singing to make money, mocked a cinematic legend for their sadistic pleasure in tormenting others on set, and in particular reserved a bone-deep hatred for one name, a person Brando saw as the epitome of Hollywood's classic hypocrisy, vanity, and decay. So which stars provoked Marlon Brando's anger and hatred to such an extent? Watch until the end of the video, because the final name will surely shock you. Charlie Chaplin, Europe's #1 hypocrite. In 1910, Marlon Brando and Charlie Chaplin worked together on a countess from Hong Kong. The result was disastrous, to the point that crew members later described it as akin to witnessing a war between gods. From the first day, Brando felt alienated in Chaplin's world. At over 70, Chaplin still made films in the style of the 1930s, slow, methodical, and demanding that actors perform with absolute precision as he envisioned. In contrast, Brando saw cinema as a place where emotions should live authentically, not as a mechanically staged performance. This philosophical clash turned the set into torture for Brando. When Chaplin demanded he redo a scene embracing Sophia Loren for the 59th time, the suppressed fire within Brando erupted. He threw his wine glass and roared, "If you love acting so much, do it yourself, you clown." Chaplin, enraged, declared, "You're ruining my film." Brando fired back with a line that became legendary. "No, I'm saving it from you." After that day's shoot, Brando walked off. Later, in an interview with Playboy, he spoke without reservation. Chaplin is the greatest hypocrite in England. He talks about humanity, about compassion, but treats people like garbage. Brando's criticism of Chaplin wasn't baseless, as the comedy legend's perfectionism was notorious enough to terrify actors. Even Sophia Loren, his co-star in A Countess from Hong Kong, admitted she couldn't stand his personality. Chaplin was infamous for absolute control. He once made a supporting actor redo a scene 120 times just because the smile wasn't timed right. But that was just the surface. According to crew members, Chaplin controlled everything to a maddening degree, forbidding any deviation from his dialogue. Every action had to follow his rhythm. 1, 2, 3, look up. 4, smile. 5, glance. If anyone missed a beat, he'd yell, "Cut again." A cinematographer recounted that for a single scene of Brando walking through a door, Chaplin demanded 37 retakes because his shadow fell in the wrong emotional direction. On set, Chaplin, wearing a beret and holding a cigarette, paced slowly around the camera, with a scrutinizing gaze, creating an atmosphere so tense no one dared laugh or speak. He was like a tyrannical king with the face of a clown. When A Countess from Hong Kong was released, it flopped spectacularly. Critics called it the worst film by two of the greatest geniuses. Brando, disappointed, never mentioned it again. Years later, when Chaplin passed away, Brando didn't attend the funeral. However, a friend recalled that he once sat alone watching the classic City Lights, then sighed with a belated but meaningful remark, "Maybe I was wrong to act that way, but his perfectionism made him a success." That statement showed that even in his deepest hatred, Brando still respected the genius and iron discipline that made Chaplin a legend. But if Brando's clash with Chaplin was a battle of arrogant titans, the next confrontation was even fiercer. For this time, Brando didn't just criticize one person. He demolished an archetype Hollywood once worshipped. Frank Sinatra, the guy who only sings for money. The feud between Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra was one of the most infamous in 1950s Hollywood, a clash between instinctive artistry from a strange beast and the polished perfection of a perfect gentleman. Brando was a rebel born to break rules, while Sinatra was the epitome of suave control. When they collaborated on Guys and Dolls 1955, the set became a literal battlefield. Tension simmered from the first day of shooting. Sinatra arrived in a pristine white shirt, expensive Chanel cologne, and the confident stride of a king. Brando showed up late in a crumpled t-shirt, eyes sleepy, cigarette dangling, embodying an outlaw. Sinatra didn't hesitate to publicly criticize Brando. "That old bastard pretends to be profound, just grimacing and whispering to seem artistic." Brando retorted with disdain, "He's only good at acting cool and primping like a woman." The entire set was perpetually on edge, awaiting an explosive confrontation. In one scene, Sinatra spat in front of Brando, a deeply insulting act. Brando merely tilted his head, wiped his shoe, and replied softly, "Thanks. At least you showed me the trash inside you." But the war didn't stop there. Brando, cunning and sharp, knew Sinatra despised custard pie. He secretly convinced director Joseph Mankiewicz to alter the script, forcing Sinatra to eat it in a scene 9 times in a row. Back then, there were no fake eating techniques, so Sinatra had to eat for real. By the 9th take, he threw down his spoon, nearly vomited, and shouted, "You're scum!" Brando calmly adjusted his collar and replied, "We're the same brother." After this incident, the crew had to schedule separate shoots to prevent further clashes. Some said Sinatra carried a flask to keep from getting irritated seeing Brando, while Brando responded with a provocative smile and silence. Though Guys and Dolls was a massive success, the rift between them never healed. Barbs continued in the press. Sinatra mocked on Brando, a lazy hippie disguised as a genius. Brando fired back in Esquire, "Frank Sinatra isn't a singer. He's just a guy selling emotions wrapped in a suit." Years later, when asked about Brando, Sinatra only smirked, "I don't like guys who play God." Their deaths, nearly half a century apart, left Hollywood retelling their story as a tragedy of pride. Two egos, two opposites, collided not to create magic, but to prove a bitter truth. True geniuses never share the same stage. But beyond these verbal battles, one name pushed Brando to lose control, not out of jealousy, but because this person mirrored what Brando feared most, a younger version of himself. James Dean, the copycat. In Hollywood history, few relationships were as poignant and harsh as that between Marlon Brando and James Dean. It's a tragic tale of a fervent admirer and a cold idol where admiration turned into obsession and bitterness. James Dean idolized Brando, absolutely. He carried Brando's essence in every gesture, from his low, husky voice to his expressive frowns and arrogant cigarette-holding style. In his early New York days, Dean would quietly sit in Brando's favorite cafe, secretly watching him. Dean even wrote a heartfelt letter. "I don't want to bother you. I just want to learn." But Brando never replied. He read the letter, folded it, and tossed it in the trash. To Brando, Dean was a distorted mirror reflecting his younger self, wild, defiant, and craving rebellion. Far from flattered, Brando felt irritated and threatened by this reflection. In 1954, when Rebel Without a Cause premiered, James Dean became a global phenomenon. His brooding face and instinctive acting led the public to call him Brando in his youth. The press didn't hesitate with headlines, "James Dean Marlon Brando's successor." Reading this, Brando gave a scornful chuckle. "He's copying me, but he needs to understand a copy is just a copy." Dean, meanwhile, remained almost fanatically devoted to Brando. He once visited Brando's home with the East of Eden script, hoping for feedback. But Brando always greeted him with cold distance. Dean left quietly, his face flushed with embarrassment. A friend recalled that night Dean drank and muttered, "I just wanted him to acknowledge me." Yet Hollywood never gave Dean a chance to be himself. The public and press constantly compared him, turning Brando's name into a shadow over Dean's every role. Instead of offering support, Brando pushed him further away. At a Los Angeles party, when someone called Dean a modern Brando, he replied coldly, "A cheap knockoff." The tragedy struck soon after. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died at 24 in a Porsche crash. His death shook Hollywood. Thousands attended his memorial, but Marlon Brando was absent. When a reporter asked why, he replied icily, "I don't visit copies of myself." The public was outraged, but those who knew Brando understood that beneath his disdain was complex pity. Dean dared to live freely and boldly, something any actor craved. James Dean died at 24, forever an icon of rebellion and eternal youth. Marlon Brando lived to 80, but perhaps if given the choice, he'd have traded places with Dean to leave at his peak before the world wore his heart to exhaustion. The next confrontation chilled Hollywood when Brando dared to openly challenge a living saint of world cinema. Clint Eastwood, Hollywood's media product. Marlon Brando once candidly told a journalist he not only disliked Clint Eastwood's acting style, but despised the persona Hollywood meticulously built around him. To Brando, Eastwood wasn't a true hero, but a polished product, an icon America needed to lull itself to sleep. He remarked caustically, "The media paints him as righteous, but his personal life is as dirty as anyone's." Brando didn't speak idly. He'd read countless articles about Eastwood's string of scandals, fleeting affairs, paternity lawsuits, and his use of power to control women. Brando saw this as blatant hypocrisy, a man playing the righteous hero on screen while mired in controversy off it. But it didn't stop there. Brando also questioned Eastwood's acting. To him, every Eastwood film was a copy of a copy, a scowl, a few guns and trite justice philosophy. He doesn't evolve, Brando said in a 1980 interview. An artist must change, but he's still on his horse gun in hand like a guy from the last century. Behind Eastwood's cool cowboy demeanor, Brando saw a man obsessed with his own image. He believed Eastwood couldn't abandon the cowboy role because without the hat, he'd be nobody. At a 1973 film event, after a few drinks, Brando, who despised Eastwood's conformity, dropped a line that froze the room. Eastwood is the perfect American icon, big, loud, and empty. The words reached Clint Eastwood, then filming High Plains Drifter. He didn't rage, just squinted and said, "Interesting." But maybe he should look at himself, since he's not so different. This sparked a Cold War lasting over 30 years between the two legends. To Brando, Clint Eastwood wasn't America's perfect man. He was a media product polished by moguls. Years after Brando's death, Eastwood was asked about their relationship. He paused, then closed the matter with wry acknowledgement. "We just didn't get along, that's all." But Clint Eastwood was never the one Brando hated most. The next person betrayed him, shattering his trust in friendship and the concept of colleagues, all because in one scene, Brando's closest friend turned into his mortal enemy. Rod Steiger, from best friend to enemy in one scene. In cinematic history, few personal conflicts left a mark, like the rift between Marlon Brando and Rod Steiger, the two leads in the classic On the Waterfront, 1954. Ironically, the moment that made the film iconic also ended their close friendship forever. It all revolved around the famous car scene where Terry Malloy Brando confesses to his brother, Charlie Steiger, with the immortal line, "You don't understand, I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am." But behind this scene lay deep conflict. Brando, a method actor, performed instinctively, improvising, and rarely adhering rigidly to the script. Steiger, conversely, was a disciplined actor, memorizing every line and valuing collaboration. When the cameras rolled, Brando poured out raw emotion. The scene was so perfect, it touched the pinnacle of pain and vulnerability. But as soon as Brando finished his key dialogue, director Elia Kazan called cut, and Brando stood, grabbed his coat, and left the set immediately. Steiger, still in the car, eyes red, and unable to break character, was stunned. He turned to the director and exclaimed, "My God, he's heartless. I'm still in the scene and he walks off. That's so unprofessional for a veteran." Steiger had to finish his final lines alone, staring at the empty space where Brando had been. This real loneliness and betrayal made Steiger's reaction and performance more authentic than ever. After the film's resounding success, Brando won the Oscar for Best Actor. Steiger, who completed that historic scene in utter solitude, received only a Best Supporting Actor nomination, along with lingering resentment for feeling abandoned and betrayed. When asked about leaving mid-scene, Brando replied, "I finished my part." He should have stood up for himself instead of blaming me. This wasn't just an excuse, but a declaration of Brando's acting philosophy. To him, performing wasn't about harmonious collaboration, but a battle between the actor and their own soul. He believed a scene could only reach absolute emotion when an actor gave everything, breaking all boundaries and rules, even if it hurt their co-star. But for Steiger, this was unforgivable betrayal. He turned us all into props, Steiger expressed bitterly. I sat there alone, trying to find my emotions while he walked off. I felt betrayed in both the role and in life. Years later, when Steiger tried to meet Brando, to reconcile and finish the unfinished story, Brando refused. He sent only a handwritten note with a cold, curt line. I have no regrets. Both legends carried this grudge to their graves. The car scene in On the Waterfront thus haunts audiences forever, not just for the dialogue, but for the moment when friendship and artistry shattered in the same frame. If Steiger was a mirror of Brando's past, the next person was the image he hated most. A young, arrogant actor lacking depth, believing talent was a ticket to royalty. Val Kilmer, the dimwit kid who thinks he's God. In Hollywood history, few conflicts were as notorious as the clash between Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer on the set of The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996. On one side was a living legend. On the other, a rising star, convinced of his own brilliance. The result, they turned the set into a literal hell, with Brando teaching Val Kilmer the meaning of humility. From their first meeting, Brando despised Kilmer. Kilmer arrived nearly an hour late, sat down, and immediately boasted, "I think my character could be smarter than your dimwit." Brando looked up, stared straight at Kilmer, and fired back, "Sure, the character has to be smart to make up for your dimwit brain." That remark ignited a prolonged war. Brando refused to speak to Kilmer for 6 straight shooting days. When director John Frankenheimer tried to arrange a script read-through, Brando said, "I don't act with someone who thinks he's God." Meanwhile, Kilmer, known for his arrogance, publicly mocked Brando on set. "You're not the king here." From then on, The Island of Dr. Moreau became a nightmare. Brando refused to leave his trailer when Kilmer was present. Kilmer deliberately flubbed lines, prolonging scenes, just to see how long Brando could take it. This feud left the crew helpless. At times, they spent 12 hours on a single, simple scene. Director Frankenheimer, nearly driven mad, recalled, "I've directed plenty of difficult people, but these two were lunatics." The conflict peaked one sweltering noon. During a break, Kilmer accidentally touched Brando's personal microphone to adjust a cable. Brando instantly yanked it back, his eyes cold as a blade. "Don't touch my stuff." Unyielding, Kilmer retorted, "You're acting like I stole from you." It didn't stop there. Brando declared he wouldn't appear on set if Kilmer was there, forcing constant schedule changes. Kilmer retaliated by altering lines mid-take, making the director cut and reshoot. A crew member even claimed Brando ordered his assistant to fill Kilmer's shoes with ice water before filming to teach him a lesson in humility. Ultimately, all scenes with both actors had to be shot separately and edited together with effects. When released, The Island of Dr. Moreau was dubbed a legendary disaster by critics. What lingered wasn't the script or effects, but the clash of two colossal egos that destroyed the film. After production wrapped, Brando summed up, "His rival caustically Kilmer has a star's face, but he always thinks he's God." The silent war seemed endless, until 2004 when Marlon Brando passed away. At his funeral, Val Kilmer sent a bouquet of white flowers with a short characteristic note. "A final gift for you, you old bastard." That line, perhaps, was the truest and most brutal closure to their fiery hatred. But the list doesn't end here. The next person provoked Brando off-screen, a man neither young nor foolish, but handsome, famous, and confident to the point Brando deemed it a sin. Burt Reynolds, the fly with a pretty face, ruining scenes. In Hollywood history, few rivalries carried such pure, enduring disdain as that between Marlon Brando and Burt Reynolds. They didn't need fistfights or shouting matches. Merely mentioning one's name to the other thickened the air with tension. Once, in a fit of frustration, Brando declared, "He's a fly." Behind that cold, dramatic statement was a clash of acting philosophies. Brando represented psychological depth, seeing acting as a bearing of the soul. Burt Reynolds, by contrast, thrived on his cinematic persona and epitomized a box office star, a dazzling smile, perfect mustache, and commercial charm. To Brando, he was just a fly ruining scenes. The conflict escalated when Paramount considered Reynolds for Michael Corleone in The Godfather before Al Pacino was chosen. Hearing this, Brando called the producer and shouted, "If you cast that glossy guy, I'm out. I'd rather die than watch that shiny mouth read Puzo's lines." To resolve it, director Francis Ford Coppola flew in to calm him. The backstage animosity quickly became public. In 1973, at a party, Reynolds confronted Brando, extending a hand and saying half-jokingly, "I hear you don't like me much." Brando glanced at the hand and replied softly, "I just hate guys pretending to be artists." The remark was a slap in the face. Reynolds shot back, calling Brando a fat old man living off the past, and on The Tonight Show, he declared, "I respect guys like Newman or McQueen." Brando, he's only alive thanks to his fat gut and old lines. It didn't stop there. When Brando shocked the world with Last Tango in Paris 1972, Reynolds mocked it, expressing confusion at audiences wanting to see a middle-aged man sweating through feigned pain. Brando countered with a sharp jab, implying only shallow people fear their own darkness. When Brando died in 2004, Reynolds offered a rare acknowledgement of his enemy. "I think he hated me. Maybe he was right. But so what, I outlived him." If Burt Reynolds earned Brando's scorn for his glamorous facade, the next person repulsed him with a madness called freedom. A man living on scandals, speaking like a lunatic, and believing drugs unlocked genius. Dennis Hopper, drugs don't make you smarter. In Hollywood's proud history, few feuds were as destructive as that between Marlon Brando and Dennis Hopper. Two men from different generations shared a fatal flaw, ego too large and extreme to collaborate. The spark of conflict smoldered in the early 1970s. As Hopper rose to fame, with Easy Rider, hailed as Hollywood's liberator, Brando, post The Godfather peak, retreated to his Tahiti villa. To Hopper, Brando's withdrawal was an admission of defeat from a monument. Emboldened, he attacked his former idol. In a 1978 interview, Brando's prime is over. Now he's just a fat old man. The words spread through Hollywood and reached Brando. He threw the magazine to the floor, sneering, "Is that junkie hallucinating?" But it didn't end there. Dennis Hopper was notorious as a drug maniac to the point Hollywood blacklisted him. He smoked drugs for breakfast, drank liquor like water, and often appeared on Apocalypse Now's set with bloodshot eyes. He even boasted in interviews, "I live authentically, just with a bit too much hallucination." Brando, then 55, looked at Hopper with a mix of disgust and pity. He told director Francis Ford Coppola, "When you need someone for a dying scene, call him. I guarantee it'll be real." Fate cruelly reunited them on Apocalypse Now's set. Hopper played a crazed photographer Brando, the legendary Colonel Kurtz. Everyone hoped for reconciliation. Instead, it was worse. Brando ordered the crew to keep Hopper at least 3 meters away and banned him from speaking to him for 15 days. The set's atmosphere was oppressive. Brando whispered lines with contemptuous eyes, while Hopper acted as if facing God. After the final scene, Hopper approached to shake hands, but Brando turned and walked away. A crew member revealed Hopper tried to make peace post-production, sending wine letters and scripts. Brando returned them all unopened. In 2010, Dennis Hopper died of cancer. Asked about his old enemy's death, and aging Brando sighed, "Self-destructive bastard." A brutal, accurate summation, closing the tragedy of two opposing geniuses in art and life. Hollywood, where light doesn't reveal truth but is staged to conceal it. Here everything is so meticulously arranged that even sadness has props, and happiness is just a perfectly rehearsed role. On the red carpet, they walk like God smiles, measured in millimeters eyes, trained to sparkle under lenses. The flash of cameras sounds like celebratory fireworks, but also tolls the death knell for the humanity left in them. When the lights dim, expensive tuxedos fall to the floor, makeup smudges on wine glasses, and in the mirror, no star remains, just a stranger trying to remember who they were. Each night, they drink to sleep, then drink to forget they drank. In lavish villas, laughter comes more from speakers than people. Loneliness in Hollywood isn't loud. It's as quiet as a stage light in an empty auditorium. Fame here doesn't bloom from light, but from darkness, from the fear of being replaced, the addiction to being seen, the craving to be remembered, even as a scrawled line on a cold tombstone. Every legend worshipped is a product of self-destruction. They sacrifice youth love and ultimately their soul for a few moments of immortality on screen. And when the spotlight shines one last time, the audience sees a radiant smile. But Hollywood, knowing better than anyone, sees only a half-burned soul about to flicker out. For here, dreams are never truly lived. They're performed over and over until the actor forgets they were ever human.